where we last October 6th, we last met. I would say the last week since we met was probably the worst week for our democracy. Maybe, top five of, our lifetimes in terms of how, now that these guys have been in power for a while, how they are, now that they've taken control, purged people from these institutions, put their own people in power, now that they are turning these institutions, unleashing them on their enemies, on democratic cities. Um, I would say it's one of the worst weeks that we've seen. Letitia James was indicted on October 9th. I just put some stuff together here so we can review the week. Obviously, Comey had his arraignment. The shutdown, we're now in, I think, day 13 with unprecedented tactics that this administration is using that previous administrations never used during a shutdown in terms of firing people, um, uh, weaponizing the probation process, all these things that OMB is all the sort of Doge tactics that should not be done during a shutdown, but they are saying are necessary. Um, the courts, continuing action in the courts, narrowing Trump's domestic troop deployments, and the tale has not been told on where that's going to end up. And this is all sort of ramping up to Saturday, October 18th, for the No Kings protests. So I think those protests are coming at a very, very important time. Anyway, that's what's been on my mind. But let's get into it.
Well, I mean, you have this growing danger heading into a weekend where there will be multitudes of millions of Americans on the street engaged in dissent. And that act of dissent has been labeled terrorism by a person named Stephen Miller, who has taken recently on a number of occasions to quote Goebbels directly while expressing his hatreds for half the country. And so we see use of federal power that is shocking, is abusive, is sustained by lies. The extraordinary moment this week of Pam Bondi trying to insinuate that the assassination of Melissa Homan and the attacks on Democratic legislators in Minnesota was conducted by left-wing terrorists. And the sum total of all of the madness is coming due. And we have a couple of things happening in the country all at once. There's one, things that are occurring right now. And in that category, vividly, is the masked federal thug on a roof who pointed a weapon and fired a pepper bowl at a priest who was protesting. That's happening right now. The second thing that's happening is that Donald Trump is suggesting that the army will flood into America's cities because there's an insurrection underway when there is no insurrection happening anywhere, except for, if you want to search for insurrections, the one that he incited in January of 2021. So you see the forces of make-believe conspiring with real military force, with real guns, to put those real guns, for the make-believe reasons, into close proximity to American citizens pointing at them. And you have a media that is run by the richest people in the world, giant corporations that are scared shitless of the administration. And the worldview that these people share is perfectly represented by Bari Weiss at CBS News, which is the great threat of our time is Greta Thunberg. And so as we come into this weekend, there is chaos in this country, and the economy day by day is worsening, while Wall Street speculators, pumped up and on by the fevered media coverage around it, are getting their last droppings before the crash comes. And it's coming. That's what the data says.
You think you're predicting an economic crash?
Absolutely. I mean, you look at everything that's happening in the American economy right now. You look at the warnings that are being made. You look at the housing market. You look at the amount of credit card late payments, foreclosures, all of those things that indicate the state of the real economy, including zero job growth. Um, Trump's Bitcoin delusions will come crashing down. I always um, the alliteration of Franklin Roosevelt in that 1936 speech where he talks about 12 years the ticker and 3 years, 9 years the bread lines. Yeah, we're in for tough days in America.
You could also add to that list of economic indicators the flight to gold, which
Yeah, yeah,
is,
yeah, yeah.
it's I think it's one of its highest value, and also to things like crypto. People are looking for safety. The Treasury Treasury Secretary, for what it's worth, also is now saying that the government shutdown is starting to hit the economy. That may or may not be true, but I assume they want to set up an argument to blame the Democrats for any economic problems in the next, in the pre-midterm period on the Democrats shutting the government down. But it also could be hitting the economy for real. But you see them setting up that argument. Let's pause on the economy for a second. I want to talk about, because I don't think we can talk about it enough, is this what we have been talking about now, Steve, for months? One of the most easily predicted things that is fortunately on track is Trump's obsession with using the military in the United States and slowly, gradually pushing towards using the Insurrection Act. And I just want to think through a little bit about what this means, because I think there are a range of scenarios that are from the worst case scenario that you hear bandied about by really serious people and serious politicians from colleagues, our colleagues on Substack, to people like Gavin Newsom, that this is a predicate that will in some way undermine the midterm elections next year. And we could talk about the steps where that would happen. I think on the more optimistic range, and I can't believe that we're sitting here talking about the range of possibilities with a president declaring using the Insurrection Act. But on the more optimistic front, it would be he uses the Insurrection Act. He sends some troops here and there. but it doesn't really have a major impact. It's mostly for show. Um, and I think you could also see a scenario, if I'm just putting on my like bloodless political hat here, where this conflict pre-midterm elections is actually a deeply motivating factor for the anti-Trump coalition, and that it completely backfires on this administration. It's the red line that they cross, and just triggers an outpouring of anti-Trump sentiment in the midterms. You're not allowed to have uh, troops or any military near polling places in almost every state, I believe. Um, Unless we're in a place where the worst case scenario is happening, where this insurrection act interacts with the election machinery in a truly dictatorial way. Um, I, I think that's a possibility that this just backfires because he doesn't actually know what he's doing here, and it triggers a political backlash like we've never seen. Um, what are your Give me your take on that in terms of the range of outcomes, if we go down this path.
Um, so I go lights out, meaning I don't see into the pitch black anything beyond the rhetoric of, well, we might not have elections that you referred to with Gavin Newsom. And so I don't think that that is the case. There's no mechanism for there to not be elections. And there were elections during the Civil War, during the Second World War. So I'm going to just stipulate that Governor Newsom is right. And there's going to be, in, I guess, the best way to say this, that his speculation about the worst case scenario comes to pass. And I guess because it's all very broad when it's stated, what he's saying is the United States Armed Forces will prevent American citizens from picking their leaders. Is that what he's saying?
I think it's vague. I think people, when they talk about this, everyone's just sort of trying to wrap their head around what this means. And I don't think he's detailed it in that way. I think generally what people mean is there's a combination of people being afraid to go to the polls, because you've created this militarized situation in some big important cities, to a much worse case scenario where there have been actual conflicts in some of these cities, and there's a government, warning, stay home.
Let's so
Now, obviously, we're in uncharted constitutional territory there, and you know, call me naive. I still think the courts will not allow those kinds of scenarios.
I'm Steve Schmidt. This is The Warning. I invite you to join this community where I promise to be honest, blunt, and direct about what is happening in this country. America is in crisis. Follow and subscribe to this channel and on Substack. Thank you.